And welcome back to Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I don't do just straight up deck techs that much on my channel anymore, but I made such an interesting, unique deck here that I wanted to share it with you. It is an idea I had in one of my 5 unique builds video, and I, as I tend to do from time to time, I went ahead and built the deck myself, and it is a really neat, interesting one, I think. It is with Smeagol Helpful Guide. Certainly not an underwhelming commander or an unpopular one, and as I usually tend to go after, but I came up with such an interesting idea here. I mean, maybe someone else has thought of this as well, but this is an idea that I came up with that I really think makes for an interesting deck. So 1 black and a green halfling horror 4/2. Beginning your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, the ring tempts you. Certainly we want to be doing that from time to time, because whenever the ring tempts you, target opponent reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a land card. Put that card on the battlefield tapped under your control and the rest into their graveyard. And I thought that was very interesting wording. I mean, obviously you want the ring to be tempting you and you want to be stealing your opponent's lands, but I thought the interesting wording there is that essentially you're milling your opponents. And wouldn't it be neat to try to make a milling deck with this guy? I think you could do it. And I mean, I don't know how many people have ever made a milling deck outside of blue. Obviously, blue is the big color there, but I did it here. And that is the part that I think is super interesting and unique here. I mean, both with what we're doing in this deck, pretty interesting, but also just the fact that we're doing a milling theme outside of blue, which is super interesting as well. And this is the commander that I think we can do it with. So, of course, we're doing the things that you would normally do in a Smeagol deck. I mean, we're tempting with the ring, right? Because we want to be getting that trigger off our commander a lot. Certainly we do, right? So we're doing all the ring tempting stuff. And in fact, the Nazgul I put in this deck because this is one of those decks where I didn't have, we're in a little bit of a French theme. So I didn't really exactly fill up the deck super easily with the theme that we were using. So I thought, why not throw the Nazgul in there as well? 2 and a black Wraith Knight 1/2 Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. So it's doing that thing we want to do. Whenever the ring tempts you, put a +1 counter on each Wraith you control. That's great. And also a deck can have up to 9 cards named Nazgul. So I thought, why not do that? Well, I threw 9 in here, right? All 9 are in this deck. So that's a little bit of a sub-theme, I suppose. Again, obviously the ring tempting you is a sub-theme in this deck. So I thought, why not throw the Nazgul in here as well? We also do want lots of creatures, right? Because of course we want our creatures to be dying, obviously to get that trigger off of our commander. Of course, because we want our creatures to be dying, we're going to do maybe cards that are fairly obvious, like Sakura Tribe Elder I would put in this deck anyway. But, we do this on our turn because our commander says at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died in control this turn. So, maybe normally you would sacrifice your Sakura Tribe Elder on your opponent's turn. Here, we probably want to, if our commander's in play anyway, we want to do it on our turn so that we will get that end step trigger, right? Thrashing Brontodon, right? Again, likely you're going to want to do this on your turn to guarantee you get that trigger off your commander. I threw some of my favorites like Garza's Assassin in the deck because, it's not the greatest removal option ever, but sacrifice it to destroy target non-black creature means that we will get the dice trigger. So there are creatures like that in the deck as well. I thought another neat thing to do in the deck is the domain ability. And I don't know if this is what people are doing in their Smeagol decks, but of course, because you're stealing your opponent's lands, likely they're going to be playing other colors, blue, red, white, possibly. So it's probably likely easy for you to get those other lands into play that you obviously normally wouldn't be able to do. So for that reason, I got Briar Hydra, 5 and a green plant Hydra 6/6 with trample, has the domain ability. Whenever Briar Hydra deals combat damage to a player, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. So if we can, happen to get, we got black and green. If we get, a mountain, an island, and a plains into play, this is going to be 5 counters on a creature every single turn. Not too shabby. Scion of Draco. Pretty great, I think, here. Again, you might see this and go, that's a weird fit. I think it's a pretty good fit. 12 mana dragon, 4/4, but of course has the domain ability. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. So, of course, just in our deck, we have swamps and forests. So it's going to cost 4 less. 8 is still a lot. but guaranteed we're going to get at least one more out of somebody, right? So 6 mana is a lot more manageable here. And also, each creature you control has Vigilance if it's white, Hexproof if it's blue, Lifelink if it's black, First Strike if it's red, and Trample if it's green. So of course, we're going to give our creatures both Lifelink and Trample. Not bad, but man, getting like an island off of somebody would be great to give all our creatures hexproof, and I think that's certainly very doable. So of course, what's this deck doing, right? If you didn't watch that 5 builds video, you're thinking, how are we going to mill our opponents out? The main theme I had in the deck was, okay, well, one thing that black does really, really well is search your opponent's library for stuff and exile it. And of course, something like Nightmare Incursion would be a great example of that. 5 and a black sorcery, search target player's library for up to X cards, where X is the number of swamps you control, then exile them and shuffle the library. So of course, what we're going to search for here, and I mean, obviously while you're looking through their library and you see, I don't know, a Farewell or something, yeah, okay, maybe we can get rid of that. Maybe they got a Thassa's Oracle, I don't know. Sure, you can do that. But what we want to do here is exile their lands, right? And of course, because our commander says you flip cards off the top until you reveal a land, if they don't have a lot of lands in their deck, then you're going to be flipping a lot of cards, right? That's how we're going to win with the milling theme here. We use those Nightmare Incursion effects to remove lands from their deck, and then when our commander's ability triggers, we'll be essentially milling more cards, right? Bitter Ordeal, funny old card. That will work here as well. 2 and a black sorcery. Search target player's library for a card and exile it. Then that player shuffles, but has the very unique Gravestorm ability. Not entirely unique anymore because they did print another card that does that. But whenever you cast a spell, copy it for each permanent put into a graveyard this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. So we want to get at least a bit. Again, we have creatures that we can sacrifice and stuff like that. That will work really, really well here. So if we can get a few creatures into graveyards, stuff like that, like this is any permanent going to a graveyard. That's not that hard to do. Even tokens will work here. We can get a bunch of copies of this. Again, search our opponent's library for stuff. And again, we can get really threatening things, but we want to exile those lands. Never-ending Torment. Pretty funny one. Again, this is a very unique deck. 4 black sorcery. Search target player's library for X cards, where X is the number of cards in your hand, and then exile them. So that's going to be doing what we want to do really, really well. However, it is the epic ability, which can be a good thing, but also obviously is a bad thing as well. For the rest of the game, you can't cast spells. At the beginning of your upkeep, for the rest of the game, copy this spell, except for its epic ability. If the spell has a target, you may choose new targets for the copy. And that's why it does work, because of course we can keep switching to other players, right? Once we've milled out one guy, we then switch to another guy. Of course, we can't cast spells for the rest of the game. So you have to be very careful when you do this. You got to have your commander in play, obviously, right? Again, remember, I know people will think, okay, that's crazy. You can't cast spells for the rest of the game. You are searching through your opponent's library and taking out all their best cards. So it might be really difficult for them to close out the game. And as long as your commander is in play, I think you can very easily win this way after you've resolved your never-ending torment. And again, as long as you have something in play, like your Call of the Ring, which at the beginning of your upkeep will tempt you, right? So a repeatable tempting trigger that doesn't actually need us to cast anything, our commander will keep triggering every turn as well, right? So I think that actually does work. However, as I was building this deck, I realized, okay, there's not as many of those black search your opponent's library for cards and exile them effects as I thought there was. It would be difficult to win by just doing it that way. And I came up with another really unique, interesting way to build this deck, which is why I think it's such a funny, interesting build. We want our opponent's lands out of their library. And what's the easiest way to get our opponent's lands out of their library? Well, I mean, obviously they can do it themselves, right? And a lot of people, as already is done in the Commander format, will be doing it in their own deck by ramping. Of course, when you ramp, you're taking lands out of your deck and putting them into play. So they're in play, but we don't care about that. We don't want them in their library. That's the goal of this deck, is to get as many lands out of our opponent's library as we can. And of course, the best way to get any lands out of someone's deck is by ramping. So we're doing a bit of a hug theme here, right? Collective Voyage is in this deck. And this is the sneaky thing we're doing here. Again, I don't know if anyone's going to figure this out. If they don't, it's going to work really, really well, right? We cast this Collective Voyage, 1 green mana sorcery. Starting with you, each player may pay any amount of mana. Each player searches their library for X basic land cards, where X is the total amount of mana paid this way. Put them on a battlefield, tap, then shuffle. So, of course, this is not a force, but everyone's going to do it. Again, even if they know what you're doing, I think people just can't. The greed is so apparent in the Commander format, right? They can't help themselves. They're gonna go get the lands, right? New Frontiers will also do the same thing. X and a green. Each player may search their library for up to X basic land cards and put them on the battlefield tapped. Then each player who searches this way shuffles. So we're just getting those lands out of our opponent's library and doing it in a very sneaky way. Root, Weaver, Druid will also work this way. 2 and a green. Elf, Druid, 2-1. When Root, Weaver, Druid enters the battlefield, each opponent may search their library for up to 3 basic land cards. They each put one of those cards onto the battlefield tapped under your control, and the rest onto the battlefield tapped under their control. So this is a double whammy here, where we are getting lands as well, but our opponents get a bunch. So that will work. And of course, Veteran Explorer, the old favorite that everyone uses in their hug decks. 1 green mana, Human Soldier Scout, 1-1. When it dies, so of course that already works in what we're doing, each player may search their library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tap, then each player search this way shuffles. So we're doing sort of the huggy theme because that actually works with getting those lands out of our opponent's library. And another card that works great for getting our opponent's lands out of their library is Wave of Vitriol. And a lot of people might not be happy to see this card. I think this is a great commander card. I used to play it all the time back in the day, and it works really well here for getting our opponent's lands out of the library. 5 green, green sorcery. Each player sacrifices all artifacts and enchantments, so it also works great against that, and non-basic lands they control. So that's the part that obviously people aren't going to like. However, for each land sacrificed this way, its controller may search their library for a basic land card and put it on the battlefield tapped. So again, this is a way to force our opponents. I mean, it is a may, but they're probably going to do that because otherwise they're just not going to have a lot of lands in play. It's a great way to get lands out of our opponent's library. I think that's a really funny theme that fits with the theme that we are already doing, right? Really, really neat, interesting deck. This is one that myself, I would, man, I mean, Smeagol is already a really popular commander. That's one reason why I didn't put this deck together myself. And also I already have a black-green deck. So I was like, I was on the fence about it. It's such a neat, interesting idea. And it's one that people I don't think will mind. The other reason, though, I will warn you that I decided against putting this deck together myself is the theme of I search my opponent's library for stuff and exile it does not work great via webcam. Be warned about that. So this is a deck certainly that is better played in person if you are thinking of putting this deck together. And if you are thinking of doing so, the deck list, of course, is in the description below. Feel free to run with it yourself. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.